the time it is existent. That particular entity is all the time it is existent, without getting reacted or getting emotional. That is that awareness, which is awareful or witnessing the little ego also, or in some cases the big or macro ego, depending upon as to how we have fed the monster. The little ego one day will become a monster ego, and made it very fat or too egoistic, or made it too thin or less egoistic. It depends upon an individual, how he exercises his mind and how he contemplates on his own ego, by remembering that even this ego is existing or dependent on the awareness or the grace of the Lord. So we have to do these exercises constantly, many times, to keep track of or aware of this micro ego. The acid test for this is that the awareness will always be stable and just witnesses without passing any judgment, even on the ego. On the contrary, it is our own ego which makes its own judgment with reference to the standards or the scale which it has set by itself, or to its liking or disliking, which it has stored in its database. So, ego changes from time to time, situation to situation, environment to environment, which is never constant or stable. Because the ego, what is ego after all? The ego is nothing but a storehouse of impressions which we have acquired in this life, or which you carry from the previous birth, if you believe in rebirth. If not, whatever the impressions that is stored in this life till now. As the inputs to the storehouse changes, naturally, ego changes accordingly. These changes are projected onto the video screen of the mind by the light of awareness. It is just projected, that's all, it is not involved. This is how the light of awareness makes the ego to be aware of its own ego and makes it to analyze and discriminate between good and bad, happiness and unhappiness, joy and sorrow, expected and unexpected, real and unreal, true and false, and so on with the pairs of opposites or duality. It is not very mysterious and paradoxical. It is reality. We have to accept it. On the other side, we feel many times it's not very mysterious and paradoxical. Of course it is, but it's a reality. To see that ego, if it is very conscious or aware, then it can by itself be aware of its own ego. By revisiting or reviewing its reflection in the mirror of light of awareness. Just like our eyes are seeing our reflected eyes, or the whole body in the mirror, in the pond of water, Here again, if you go into the silent, absolute or absolute peace or blissful state of meditation, then there will not be any ripple or disturbance, whereby we can see clearly a reflected or projected ego or consciousness or ego consciousness. But in case if the mirror is dirty, the reflecting media is dirty or not clear, but the water in the pond is dirty and not clear or not still, then we cannot see really with clarity the reflected ego. Once we cannot see that, then there will not be awareness of ego, because the reflected media is not clear, not still, without waves or ripples. So, my dear readers, and myself, the speaker or the writer, have to be very much alert to know, or to be aware of the ego, or aware of our own ego. Paradoxically, ego will be, or shall be, or have to be aware of one's own, or its own. This is the beauty of the awareness of the ego by the ego itself. Here, the question comes. We have started the process with a micro-ego, observing on the mental screen of the reflected attitudes of the characters, of the elements, of the qualities of the subconscious ego. It is reflected by the light of awareness. Only this micro-ego will be able to observe or visualize on this screen the reflected entities of this ego, provided this micro-ego also surrenders to the God or the Lord Supreme or the pure awareness. Then that pure awareness or the Lord will give that light into this micro-ego, that vision rather, so that it can see on the reflected screen the attitudes of the entities, of the characters, of the qualities of the ego. But here again, we have started the process with the micro-ego. That's a good beginning. And then we have surrendered ourselves to the Almighty God. Then this micro-ego, with little micro-ego in one corner of the mind, is able to observe the elements of the attitudes of the subconscious stored impressions of the ego nature. The nature of the ego is being observed from one corner. Here, in the process, we should be very clear that the negative attitudes or the negative elements of the ego, which is already having the impressions in the subconsciousness, and it has become the nature of an individual, as a first step that should be observed by this micro-ego. Yes, first thing is observe on the mental screen. These are all my negative attitudes or the negative elements or the negative characters or the qualities of the ego. That is like getting anger, jealousy, too much proud, and thinking that I am a great Bhakta, thinking that I am a great jnani, thinking that I am a great writer, or the speaker, or the reader, or the listener. So all these negative attitudes, which is reflected on the screen, this little micro-ego will be observing from a neutral stand and accept, yes, I, this physical body, mind and intellect, I, the individual, have these negative attitudes or negative elements or negative characters or negative qualities, which is deeply hidden in my subconscious mind. Now the job is simple. Once this contemplation is going on within my mind every moment, then the neutral mind or the neutral ego, conscious ego, will accept that it has these negative attitudes. So these negative attitudes of this ego, these negative ego tendencies, once it is accepted, that's a great job done by this micro-ego. The moment the individual, the self, the individual body, mind and intellect itself accepts it, then there is no problem to remove. Anything which comes to an individual from within himself, he will accept it, he or she will accept it easily, and he will try to resolve it, he will try to correct it, he will try to refine it, he will try to undo it, because it is he who has realized. This is the nature of every individual. On the contrary, if somebody else tells that, look, you are a very angry person, you are not a good person, you are a jealousy person, you are having too much of it. All these things come from external source. The micro-ego of conscious ego will not accept it because its very nature is egoistic, and it will get reactive and it will try to jump and pounce on the other individual and try to argue with him, and they will try to say, you are also having ego, you are also having jealousy, you are also having negative tendencies. All these things will go, there is a conflict between the two, and thereby it will not lead to any positive goal. So the beauty is, all the scriptures, in all the scriptures it is said repeatedly again and again. We can read many books, we can listen many scriptures, we can listen to lot of sadhgurus. Ultimately, it is the individual who has to do the concerted, the concentrated and the dedicated or the contemplative effort of self-introspection. He should go within himself and contemplate. Who am I? What is my nature? How egoistic I am? What are all the negative tendencies in my ego? What are all the positive tendencies? Develop the technique of awareness. The moment the negative tendencies are accepted by the micro-ego from one corner, naturally the next stage or the next step will be to minimize these negative tendencies over a period of time.